In times of dire need, phantoms stalk the battlefields of the 40k universe, dealing death to the enemies of the Emperor and carrying the day when all seems lost for the forces of the Imperium. Hidden away on the Warhammer community site lies a PDF datasheet for the Legion of the Damned. These rules never made the transition to 10th edition, not even as part of the Legends datasheets, and maybe they never will. You could say that this faction exists in a state of undeath. Not quite alive, but not quite dead. Ironically, that would be a tragic and perfectly fitting end to the story of the Legion of the Damned. However, this isn't just any type of story, it's a ghost story. And today is the perfect day for it. In the mornings, I search through my wardrobe to find the least stained black shirt with red flames on. Why is this? Is it because I find that it really complements my black cargo shorts, socks, and rubber sandals with skulls on them? No, it's because I'm a wargamer, and that's our uniform. However, if I ever accidentally breach the terms of my house arrest and meet another person, and that person also happens to share a love for obscure Warhammer 40,000 background, they might ask why I'm dressed as one of the Legion of the Damned. Who are the Legion of the Damned, you might ask? That's easy. What are they? That's another story. Because the Legion of the Damned are hiding a big secret. Possibly the biggest secret in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. And like a magic trick, it's revealed while you're concentrating on something else entirely. In White Dwarf 195 in March 1996, there was an unusual sight. This was in the middle of Games Workshop's massive UK expansion, and they had just opened their 100th store. Where was this 100th store, you might ask? Warrington. Where is Warrington, you might ask? Between Liverpool and Manchester, although I do need witnesses on the ground to confirm this. Or is it? My sources seem to place it directly in the middle of Borley Rectory. Could the most haunted place in England have one final secret to uncover? Oh no, sorry, I must have nudged the mouse while on Google Maps. It is actually between Liverpool and Manchester. Anyway, to celebrate this milestone came a model that would fit into any army. You guessed it. An Ultramarines Primaris Lieutenant. Only this one had a black colour scheme covered with skulls and flames and was called Sergeant Centurius. The article made it clear that he was from a chapter known as the Legion of the Damned, and it went on to explain that they were kind of phantoms that appeared to assist Space Marines in situations of extreme importance. In this article, and in the previous year's Codex Ultramarines, the Legion of the Damned had been presented as an unexplained mystery. They would appear out of nowhere on the battlefield and deliver some critical victory, even if the results of their actions wouldn't become apparent for hundreds of years, as if their hand was guided by an unknown force. It was stated that the origins of the Legion had been lost to the sands of time, and in the mid-90s, you would be correct. However, a text box in the 2nd edition Codex Ultramarines talks about the Firehawks and their disappearance in the year 963 in the 41st millennium. However, back to the article that introduces Sergeant Centurius, and there is a piece of lore here that has lived in my head for a long time. In it, a tech adept is summoned to a secret chamber in some kind of Imperial facility. After doing a checkup, he is stopped by a hooded Space Marine. The tech adept responds that everything is in order and that there are no losses or perceptible mutations. When the hooded figure asks for more information about the life signs, the adept responds that they are stabilized at nil. This appears to be the wrong answer, as the hooded Space Marine slips a device into his jugular before reflecting that tech adepts are always too clever for their own good, always figuring it out. But what's going on here? Figuring what out? I thought that this article was supposed to be about the Legion of the Damned, but this hooded figure doesn't resemble them at all. Is it a Dark Angel? What is happening here? Pieces of fiction shouldn't encourage me to use my imagination. I want my lore served up for me on a silver platter, ideally in ebook format for $10.99 a book. Well, hold that thought because we'll get back to it. As we've talked about before, this was in the mid-90s and the internet was not as freely available as it was going to be. Steve Jobs was still building NXT computers rather than iPhones, and most people would not have been able to easily check on who or what the Legion of the Damned truly were. Also, this was when the majority of people were being exposed to the hobby in the large expansion. Back issues of White Dwarf were not digitized, Wikipedia didn't exist, and Games Workshop didn't have a great web presence. At that time, the only way to find out more was to talk to someone who remembered their original article from issue 99 of White Dwarf magazine, almost 100 issues and around 7 years prior. Issue 99 was released in March 1988. That's only 6 months after the launch of Rogue Trader. This was way before the background of 40k crystallized into the universe we know about today, so there was plenty of weird stuff in it. It was a case of throwing things up against a wall and seeing what stuck. John Blanche enjoyed riding a Vincent Black Shadow bike, so they cast up a Vincent Black Shadow and sidecar and let Space Marines ride it into battle. And like a butterfly flapping its wings on one side of the world and causing a devastating typhoon elsewhere, the idea of a Space Marine attack bike directly led us to the release of the Invader ATV. However, this Index Astartes article wasn't just a throwaway piece of fluff. It was written by Rick Priestley, so there is a reasonable amount of weight to its content. In it, the mystery is seemingly solved within the first paragraph. The Firehawks fleet of 5 ships, over 800 brethren, and 2,000 other personnel made a routine warp jump that was expected to take 12 hours. However, they never made the final return to real space, and the chapter was declared lost. The Bell of Lost Souls, not that one, told 1,000 times, and the Emperor himself ordered a black candle to be lit in the Chapel of Fallen Heroes. Okay, that bit about the Emperor personally ordering stuff to get done in the 41st millennium has been retconned out of existence, just like the Great Barking Toad of Catachan from the Rogue Trader Compendium, which, when threatened, emits a cloud of toxins that kills all life within a kilometre in every direction. Back to the issue. Soon after, 2 coffins containing bodies were found and brought back to Earth for investigation. They contained 2 Marines in unusual coloured armour. However, the serial numbers of equipment tallied with weapons and armour made by or issued to the Firehawks chapter. Almost a year later, during the siege of an Imperial research station, several hundred orcs were killed by mysterious power-armoured figures who left behind a banner, the chapter flag of the Firehawks, inscribed with the motto, "For the Emperor, beyond the point of death." Further investigation revealed a recorder that documented the fateful warp jump. It told that their fleet was captured within a warp storm and attacked by powerful warp entities until only 1 craft remained. It made a desperate jump, eventually emerging from the warp in the galactic east, beyond what would become later known as the Light of the Astronomicon. Soon it became obvious that the remaining 200 Marines had been exposed to some form of dangerous mutation, a disease that slowly killed them but gave them prodigious fighting ability. Their bodies began to decay and rot. However, as they succumbed to it, they gained enhanced strength, and in their final moments, they went through a berserk death spasm before perishing. The remaining Marines used the Mystic Emperor's Tarot to direct their attacks and spend what was left of their lives in service of the Imperium. So there we go. The mystery appears solved. The Legion of the Damned are the remains of the Firehawks after the chapter was lost in the warp. A couple of issues later came the Index Astartes article on the Badab War, which again mentioned the Firehawks in its brief overview of the conflict, as well as showing their colour scheme, which matched up with their artwork in the previous issue. Now, these articles have to be understood in the context that the 40k universe at this time was just an early first draft, and didn't properly form until the mid-90s, when the Space Marines, the Emperor, the Warp, and the Gods of Chaos were properly fleshed out. Some of the ideas shown, however, would be reused later. For instance, in Codex Chaos, published in 1996, another chapter gets lost in the warp. This seminal book goes into detail about the history of all of the Chaos Legions. In particular, it mentions the creation of the Death Guard, who are marooned in the warp while attempting a long journey to Earth during the Horus Heresy. During their journey, a mysterious contagion began to spread from ship to ship, rotting the victims from the inside. Eventually, the Legion's Primarch, Mortarion, became infected, and in his delirium, he called upon the powers of chaos to aid him. These prayers were answered by Nurgle, and the rest is history. Interestingly, later in Codex Chaos, there is an article about the Badab War, and the article straight up mentions the Firehawks and recaps the origin of the war almost verbatim. Plus, in a bold out of left field, it even mentions that the Badab system is right next to the homeworlds of the Squats, in particular the Squat worlds of the Capellan League, which itself is mentioned in the 9th edition Leagues of Votan Codex, which is an impressive deep cut for the writers to call back to. Also, in Forge World's Imperial Armor 9, Badab War Part 1, the Firehawks are introduced to the story patrolling none other than the Golgothian Wastes. I wonder if they are related to this Golgotha, but maybe that's a tale for another day. This brings us to the next publication to make their way to the witness panel. It's the legendary Forge World Badab War series, written by the late great Alan Bligh. Unlike the other publications mentioned, both volumes of these books can be found digitized almost in their entirety in the Warhammer Vault. The war itself is huge and can be recapped elsewhere, but Volume 1 is important because it goes into detail about the modern interpretation of the Firehawks. The first thing to notice is that their their logo has changed. The nuclear bomb explosion of 1998 is now a stylish red phoenix rising from the flames. This almost certainly refers to the chapter rising out of the ashes on more than one occasion, including having the dishonour of losing 2 homeworlds, the first one to a thermonuclear orbital bombardment unleashed by a fleet of the Ecclesiarches Frateris Templar, and the second in unknown circumstances. And from then on, things get deep. I'm talking iceberg deep. The Imperial Armor books and the Sisters of Battle Codex fills in a lot of interesting information. For example, the Raptorus Rex. The Raptorus Rex was, or is, a pre-Imperial star fortress that was the only surviving capital ship of the Firehawks at the end of the Badab War in 913 Millennia 41. Exactly 50 years later, in 963, the Firehawks would go missing, taking the Raptorus, 5 ships of the line, 800 Marines, and 2,000 other personnel, along with the chapter master Stibor Lazarak and his presumed heir, the captain of the 8th Company, Elam Corbray, who are both said to have survived the conflict. I'm not sure if a chapter could rebuild that quickly after taking the kind of losses the Firehawks took in the conflict, but regardless, these are almost the exact numbers from the original article in 1988. Now, the Raptorus Rex was given to the chapter as a gift from none other than Sebastian Thor, after the chapter fought for him during the Reign of Blood. But who is he, I hear you ask? Sebastian Thor. Sebastian Thor was a curious individual. He was a preacher who united the worlds around Segmentum Obscurus to try and overthrow Gorg Vantire during one of the many civil wars fought after the Emperor was interred on the Golden Throne. Now, apart from Sebastian rolling high on his natural charisma and claiming to have visions of the Emperor, he doesn't appear to have any special powers apart from being able to quell the warp storms that were engulfing the Imperium during the early 36th millennium. Once Gorg was unseated, Sebastian was instated in the ensuing power vacuum, and he handed the Firehawks their flagship, the Raptorus Rex. Thor had such a meteoric rise, there is a sub-faction of the Inquisition named after him. These Inquisitors call themselves Thorians, and they believe that the Emperor has manifested his spirit through his chosen vessels many times, but that these bodies were only able to contain the barest fraction of his power and soon withered and died. Of course, the Sisters of Battle Codex states that Thor died at 112, so not really sure how to take that last bit. Another curious phenomenon about Thor is that when Vandire sent a fleet to destroy him, it was swallowed up by the sudden appearance of a warp storm called the Storm of the Emperor's Wrath, and this was taken as a sign of the Emperor's will. Now we're really deep, and we have to talk about something I'm going to call the Dead Emperor theory. Here's a few things you might have missed from the mouths of the designers themselves. The first is from Rick Priestley in a December 2015 interview with Unplugged Games. I quote, "The whole idea of the Emperor is that you don't know whether he's alive or dead. The whole Imperium might be running on superstition. There's no guarantee that the Emperor is anything other than a corpse with a residual mental ability to direct spacecraft. It's got some parallels with religious beliefs and principles, and I think a lot of that got missed and overwritten." End quote. Interesting. The next is more direct and comes from an interview with John Blanche, uploaded by filmdegminiatures on YouTube. About 9 minutes into the interview, he drops an absolute bomb. This image was never meant to be the real Emperor. The real Emperor is a corpse in a big glass jar kept alive by machines in the background. End quote. So now we know that, it puts the article from White Dwarf 195 into a completely different context. I believe that this piece of text appears to be showing a member of the Adeptus Custodes euthanizing a tech adept after carrying out some maintenance on the Golden Throne and realizing that the body held within was dead. Yep, this means that the Emperor is dead, and this was hinted at back in the 90s. Of course, in the 40k universe, being dead isn't the kind of problem that it is these days, especially if you happen to be an exceptionally powerful, almost godlike being. It also leads to another question. The Emperor was worshipped as a god almost immediately upon being placed on the Golden Throne. However, if the Emperor was mortally wounded but still alive at the end of the Horus Heresy, in the year 14 of Millennia 31, and dead in the current time period of the 41st or 42nd millennium, when exactly did he die? I'm going to point to when I think this was and give some ideas why. The 36th millennia. In the 36th millennium, there was a massive increase in warp storms all around the galaxy. This This was also the start of the civil war known as the Age of Apostate under Gorg Van Dyer. This was also the rise of Sebastian Thor. It was also when people started to believe that the Emperor's spirit was directing people to achieve some important goal, i.e. the start of the Thorian belief system. This was also when the Custodes who guarded the Golden Throne let the brides of the Emperor, the precursor to the Adeptus Sororitas, see the Emperor himself, something that hadn't been done since the end of the heresy. Also, guess what else happened in the 36th millennium? The cursed 21st founding. Now, foundings, for those who don't know, are the creation of the new Space Marine chapters. The Ultima founding that created the Primaris legions being the 27th founding. But guess what chapter was part of this cursed 21st founding? That's right, it's the Firehawks. Now, these facts could all be coincidences. However, if I had to bet, I'd say that what caused all of these events was the final death of the Emperor and his spirit's ascendance into the warp. The Golden Throne that we know of in the 41st millennium is just some bones in degrading flesh with residual psychic energy that powers the Astronomicon, along with the Psychers sacrificed to it to keep the Imperium running. Also, I'm going to take a guess here and say that the chapter mentioned in the lore box, the Flame Falcons, are a callback to the original Rogue Trader version of the Firehawks. They have a similar name, and they seem to share the spontaneous and extreme physical corruption. However, if the Flame Falcons have the warp contagion, then what exactly happened to the modern day Firehawks that turned them into the Legion of the Damned? The iceberg goes deeper. Stibor Lazarak. Stibor Lazarak was the Knight Commander of the Firehawks during the Badab War. He was over 600 years old at the beginning of the conflict in 901 Millennia 41, which could put him as old as 700 when the fleet went missing in 963. The Imperial Armor Book doesn't have any pictures of Stibor and no model exists. However, he is described as having numerous war wounds. Also, due to his age, it's assumed he must have at least have a few service studs, a kind of battle honour for length of service. Stibor brought the entire chapter into the war when the Firehawks strike cruiser the Red Harbinger was captured by the Mantis Warriors. This was a costly action by the Mantis Warriors, as Stibor is, to put it mildly, a salty old dog. He was in failing health and did not take slights to his honour well. He already held a grudge against the Astral Claws when their chapter master was given the honour of leading the Lycanthroth campaign over him, and given that the commander in question was Given that the commander in question would become Huron Blackheart, an infamous renegade Chaos Warlord, that's a pretty damning indictment. The Firehawks already had a reputation that included excessive use of force against civilian targets, desertion when the losses became extreme regardless of the cost to their allies, and in one case, a 3-century-long feud with the Iron Hands that ended with the death of a Firehawks commander. This isn't exactly the kind of attitude that gets you promoted at work, except in the public sector. And when he wasn't given full command of the Loyalists after the death of the Loyalist commander during the Badab War, he went on what is described as a ranting tirade. Again, this is all extremely common in the public sector. Also of interest is that Stibor was a devout Thorian. There's that word again, and he believes that the Emperor is a god who can project his will into other people. In conclusion, exactly what happened next is up for debate. However, I could imagine something like this. After rebuilding the chapter, the Firehawks made the jump to the Crow's World system, and immediately something went wrong. Exactly how this happened is unknown, but given the scale of the civil war that had just been fought, Inquisitor Jarndyne Frayne might have decided to sabotage their warp jump and rid the Imperium of another potentially troublesome chapter, rather than risk the huge amount of damage the Firehawks and their unstable leader could cause. Of course, it could just be divine fate or a mixture of the two. The failed warp jump smashed apart the Firehawks fleet, and soon it was reduced to a single ship, the Raptorus Rex. Their master, Stibor Lazarak, had finally been pushed to his breaking point. His chapter had been mauled during the Badab War, and he had been slighted by once again being overlooked for direct command. As he ranted and raved from the deck of his flagship, he called out to the Emperor for aid. If the Emperor truly was a god, then how could he let this happen? Then, in his hour of need, the Emperor spoke back. However, Stibor wasn't the most tactful of men, and it's highly possible that the conversation took a turn for the worst. The Emperor might be a god, but he almost certainly isn't benevolent. And if he could put down a rebellion by working through Sebastian Thor, a simple preacher, imagine what he could do with a giant star fortress and a force of space marines. Soon after, the black-armoured Legion of the Damned began appearing in times of need to assist the Imperial forces and turn the tide of battle when all seemed lost. The Inquisition, who looked into these events, the amusingly titled Oro Obsoletus, have identified one individual in particular. To them, he is known by the name as Sergeant Centurius, but this individual might be none other than Knight Captain Elaine Corbray, and Corbray carries an ancient skull into battle. This skull, known as the Animus Malorium, sucks the souls out of enemies, leaving only emancipated corpses on the battlefield after the Legion has passed. If you are ever unlucky enough to get close to it and live, you might make out that this skull is covered in Space Marine service studs. Maybe Stibor got exactly what he wanted when he demanded to serve the Emperor one last time. Or maybe I'm just looking into it too deeply. After all, Robute Guilliman came back to life because a space robot we only met yesterday built him a special suit of armour, while an exiled Elder Psyker who was just standing next to the shrine housing his body called in an Elder God to flat out heal him up as good as new. That's the writing I like, nice and easy to understand. Well, not that easy. I think I've given myself a migraine thinking about it. Robute Guilliman is back, that's all that matters. Sorry, I'm not sure what came over me there. Maybe it's because I promised my Ko-fi subscribers a lot of short videos and I ended up writing over 4,000 words on the Legion of the Damned. If you like being hoodwinked by deranged conmen, sign up and you could see your name in the credits here. The link is in the description below. If you like this video, try out this one about becoming a Space Marine Scout. It has loads more jokes in it, and I'll see you next time.